We're at an event, Future of Technology in Education. How can we see the future? How can I advance my presentation to the next slide? Hey, here we are. One way to see the future is to look at the present, where the future has already arrived. William Gibson said, the future's already here, it's just not evenly distributed yet. What he was getting at, we can look at areas. Personal Computer World magazine was the computer magazine I grew up reading. The last ever edition was this August. I went out and bought a copy specially. I hadn't bought a copy in years. Neither had anybody else, and that's why the magazine isn't here any longer. It's been swept away by the internet. Maybe that happened first to computer magazines, because you might imagine people who read computer magazines are going to be on the internet more than anybody else. But now, everyone's on the internet, so maybe simply knitting will be disappearing next. Now, universities are not going to be swept away by the internet. They're not going to disappear overnight, but they are going to be transformed. Universities are about knowledge, learning, ideas, information, and information is digital and information is networked. So let's have a look at some other industries like the music industry or newspapers where this is already happening, and we might see some of the challenges that are coming to us. Okay, another far-sighted author, Douglas Adams. The title for this is Shamelessly Nixon Douglas Adams, who himself was referencing Stanley Kubrick. He wrote an essay in 1999, How to Stop Worrying and Learn to Love the Internet. And what he said in this was, everything that was in the world when you were born is normal. Anything that gets invented between then and when you're about 30 is exciting, innovative, creative, and with any luck you can make a great career out of it. Anything that gets invented after you're 30 is against the natural order of things. It's the beginning of the end of civilization as we know it. Until about 10 years later when it turns out that actually it was okay, really. He wrote that in 1999 when universities were on the internet, but maybe the rest of the media were just catching up to them, and there was lots of huffing and puffing about it. Another very insightful person, Tim Berners-Lee, what he said when he invented the web was not about machines, the web was about connecting people. The first web browser wasn't just a web page viewer, it was a web page editor. What we call Web 2 was his vision for the web from the very start. It was about bringing people together. He designed it for a social purpose and not a technical purpose. He invented it somewhere between 1989 and 1993, depending on how you want to date it. In 2004, he was awarded a knighthood by the Queen, and he came top of a poll for Greatest Britain Living. So Douglas Adams was right. It took about 10 years for us to realise what this thing called the web was and that it was important. But we still haven't quite got it. Douglas says that we're stumbling along, we're cobbling things together. We don't understand things, so we tend to overemphasise the risks and underestimate the benefits in any new technology. It takes the next generation, the people where it was already in the world when they were born, to really sort of take to something naturally. But I want us to be pragmatic. I want us to understand how the internet works, and that's about understanding the people. It's understanding the people and not the technology. And I want us to use those insights to build our universities. Where do I get my ideas from? These are some of the information sources, just a few, but these are some of the, say, traditional lectures that I've been to or I've listened to in the last 6 months. It's great to learn. I'm fascinated by learning. I go to the University of Bristol. It's our 100th year. We're having a whole series of presentations and the leading speakers we can get on anything. I'm sitting there with 600 people listening to Daniel Dennett talk about consciousness. That's a fantastic experience. I fall asleep in the lecture. That's my fault. That's not his. But we're taking that to 600 people in Bristol. We're streaming that out worldwide. We're putting it out on demand on our website. That's amazing. But I'm not limited by what's here in Bristol. I can go to any university or I can go anywhere else and I can hear fantastic speakers. I suspect a lot of people in this room have heard of TED.com. If you haven't, go and check it out. What is TED.com? This is their quote. It's a conference and it's a website. This is their definition of TED.com. And the reason I find this interesting is, to me, inspired thinkers, curious souls, engaging with ideas, that's a pretty good definition of a university. So the competition for universities may come from quite unexpected sources. Once upon a time, TED was a very high-profile, very prestigious, very exclusive conference that people paid thousands of pounds to go to. And it still is. But now they release all their material for free on the internet, and it's a huge hit, and it hugely bolsters their brand and their reputation. People still go to the conference. They still want the immediate day-to-day contact. They want the networking. They want the face-to-face. It hasn't destroyed them, it's bolstered them. If you're living in today's world, you're living in a networked world. And network effects are supremely important. A larger network always beats a smaller network. The first telephone in the world was useless. It only had a purpose when the second telephone came along. But then you had 4 or 5, or a few thousand, or a few million. And the value of that network grows according to the number of connections in the network. Now, this is very true for telephones. This is true for everything. I have an online calendar service that I use at the University of Bristol, and that's great. But it only allows me to arrange appointments with other people at the same university. Sometimes I get a request from a colleague to attend a meeting, and they use meetup.com. And the first time this happened, maybe the first 2 or 3 times this happened, I got quite annoyed. I thought, why are they using this when they could use our in-house internal service? They're just putting me to extra effort. And then I thought, well, actually, this makes a lot of sense. We have a lot of academics who are collaborating with people across industry worldwide, across academia worldwide. Our calendar service doesn't help them. Why are we foisting it on them? They want to use a tool which allows them to communicate with people worldwide. So meetup.com wins because it's a global network and you can arrange an appointment with anybody with an email address. It solves the problem globally. New collaboration tools break down barriers. Peter Drucker, the great management guru, said about 10 years ago that the computer had only just begun to change the way in which organisations are managed. What he was getting at is that newer collaboration tools make it easier to communicate with people, and it has quite far-reaching effects on the organisation. They flatten and threaten the traditional hierarchies. They reduce the boundaries between one organisation and another. We're in a digital world in which we have too much information. Maybe just in the last 10 years, our problem has switched from having too little information to having too much information. We've almost got the wealth of human knowledge online. That's a slight exaggeration, but maybe not too much. And if the Google Book settlement comes through, then it'll get close to true. So we've got that, but we've got fraud, we've got spam, we've got corporate propaganda, we've got everything. How do we find our way through it? The reason I've got a picture of the moon landings up there is most of the world is celebrating 40 years since man first walked on the moon. But not everybody is. There's quite a few people out there who are conspiracy theorists. They think the whole thing was faked. They pick and choose their evidence to support their beliefs. Now, if our students are studying the moon landings, where do they get their information from? Do they get it from the conspiracy theorists, or do they get it from NASA? So, digital literacy is incredibly important. The university library and the whole institution we need to be a trusted guide. We need to teach people these skills. We're not necessarily the source of all the information, but we're the people that the students go to because they trust us and we guide them in the right direction. If you can't find something, it's completely worthless. Every now and then my mum tries to persuade me to have a clear out. It doesn't normally work. I'm a hoarder. I stick it in the garage, I stick it in the loft, it goes under the bed and it gathers dust. But she says if you can't find it, you won't use it, so throw it out, and she's absolutely right. But this applies to most of the information in our organisation. We lock it away, we stick it in a cupboard, it's got a barrier in front of it. We know that our students and our staff and absolutely everybody else always goes to Google first to find out information. We do it because it gets the right answer or a good enough answer most of the time, and it's quick and it's easy and convenient. So we can construct search tools for our internal repositories, but people won't use them unless we can find a way to build on top of the larger network that's out there. So what you could do, use Google Scholar, but tie it in with your institution. You can use the API in Google Scholar so that your students can search through Google Scholar and they can find the full text resources of what your university library subscribes to, and they can click through and they can get it. And it can even have a logo on it saying who paid for it, so you get the credit for it. So what you're doing is you're building on top of that larger network in order to add value to it. You're not building a separate small network that nobody's going to use. That's the result. Anybody can copy information. It's completely trivial. Doctor Who came back to TV in 2005. Even before the first episode had been broadcast, it was available on BitTorrent. It leaked about 3 days earlier from a TV company in Canada. Now, if the BBC and the Hollywood studios can't stop their films leaking on the internet, why do we think we can control our content within an educational organisation? No matter what technical measures we put in place, it's going to leak out somehow. So you might think, oh gosh, this is terrible. So we won't record anything. We won't digitise anything. We'll just sort of keep it somewhere where it's inaccessible, and it's difficult. But that won't work, because anything you say and do will be recorded. I'm being recorded now by the conference organisers, but I could be being recorded by anybody in the audience with a dictaphone or a mobile phone in their pocket. There's probably lots of people tweeting about this right now. I'll be very interested to hear what they say about it when I go and sit back down afterwards. But we're all being surveyed. This is a picture of Ian Tomlinson at the G20 protest. We used to worry about CCTV cameras in the state spying on us. Maybe we still do. But we're spying back on the state, because every citizen has got a camera phone. Lots of people have got a video phone. So anything you say can be recorded, and your students will be recording your lectures by sticking their camera phone in front of them on the desk. So we might as well do it and do a good job of it for them. This is a headline from the Chronicle of Higher Education in the US. It's about a case of a student, a computer science student, who was accused of plagiarism by his professor. The professor had set an essay, set a coding assignment, and the student had completed it and submitted it, and it was returned, and then afterwards the student posted their code up online on their personal website. And the professor had a problem with this. He said, well, but you've made it available to everybody else, they'll copy you. Next year I'll have to set a different assignment if I'm not careful. And the student said, well, yes, but this is what I've done. I want to share it with the world, I want to open source it, I want to show my future employers the quality of what I can produce. So it went to the university internal appeals procedure. They sided with the student, not the professor. Next year he'll have to work slightly harder and set a different assignment. What the student understood, that your reputation is what's important to you, and not actually the content, gathering that attention from people. Stephen Fry has an awful lot of followers on Twitter. The story goes that he completely destroyed the prospect for the BlackBerry, I think it's the BlackBerry Bold in the UK, in a series of 3 tweets just before Christmas last year. When mini review, he completely slammed it as not really being fit for purpose. An awful lot of people follow Stephen Fry. Very quickly, nobody wanted to buy the BlackBerry Bold. How do we rate ourselves? It would be a bit facetious to say you could rate your university by its ranking in Google, or you could rate any individual by how many followers they've got on Twitter. It's facetious, but there's a small grain of truth in that. There's certainly things we should pay attention to. How do we deploy a new technology? I like to think there are 3 stages, and let's think about video and audio lectures to start with. First of all, you do what's difficult. So the first use case might come along because you have a large cohort of students and your lecture theatre isn't big enough. So you set up some live streaming and you send it from one lecture theatre to the next. That was difficult before. Next, you do something that's impossible. So you do catch-up TV for lectures, you do BBC iPlayer for lectures. If a student misses the lecture because they're ill or for whatever other reason, or they just want to go back and view it when they're doing their revision later on in the year, they can. That would have been completely impossible before the digital video revolution and a network world came along. The final stage is you do something that's completely inconceivable. So maybe you don't sit the students down in a huge lecture theatre like this and get them to listen to you for 50 minutes. Maybe you make them watch the video first, and then you can spend that 50 minutes later in an interactive question and answer session with the students. Wouldn't that be fantastic? Wouldn't that be a better use of the resources? Wes Streeting, the president of the NUS, is calling for exactly that. To sum up, 3 rules for living, working in a networked world. Think globally, don't think institutionally. Hook into larger networks and build on top of them. Your information's a default to open, not closed, so you can find it. If you lock it away, it's not going to be found, and you might as well have it in the garage in the loft. Anything that could be copied will be copied, so don't worry about that. Worry about your reputation and not your content. Where does that leave us? Where does it leave us as IT professionals, as librarians, as educators? We're back to being the trusted guide. We're not the people who have all the answers, but we should be facilitators. We should be brokers. Some things we will do in-house. Some things we will deploy ourselves. Other things we will outsource. Other things might be hosted in the cloud. Some things we won't provide at all, and we'll say, actually, there are plenty of options out there, and we don't mind which you use. But we want students and staff to work with us. We don't want them to work around us. If we're obstructive, then they'll go ahead and they'll do it anyway, because there's nothing to stop them doing it any longer. They can sign up for any web service, they can buy any consumer IT gadget they like, and there's nothing to stop them. So let's work with them and engage with them in that. And this wouldn't be a proper talk about trying to quote my sources. So, you've probably seen maybe the 2 or 3 of those. The most useful I have found out of all those references is another 10-year-old report. It's a book by Kevin Kelly. You can buy the paper copy, you can view it on his blog where he releases it in slow snippets, or you can download the entire thing. But it's the most insightful thing I've seen on IT now, and it was written 10 years ago. You could go and read my blog, might be interested. If you really want something, I'd recommend go out there, talk to your students, and they're the people who will give you the most insights on how we should be developing technology for the future of our education. Thank you.